What's up, everybody? Chris Pennell here. We're going to my running back tier rankings for week 14 of the fantasy football season. If you enjoy, make sure you have a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you're brand new. Let's dive right into it. And as always, we'll start with the S turn. There's only one man that has a reserve spot no matter what week in, week out, despite the matchup. So give him his throne. It's Christian McCaffrey of the 49ers. And there's no reason not to have him number one every single week. He gets elite volume. He's an elite talent, an elite offense, elite offensive line, elite scheme. Really no downside here. Plus, it's a great matchup versus Seattle Seahawks. He had a great game versus them on Thanksgiving. We get the exact same spot here at home versus Seattle Seahawks. 28.5 implied team total, 10.5 point favorites. At home, the Seahawks are currently allowing the 5th most points per game at the position. He's averaging nearly 23 opportunities every single week, close to 18 carries and 5 targets and a 19% target share. And his quarterback is currently the MVP favorite, so they got all things cooking on that offense. So no reason not to have CMC number one each week. His median projection is just a few points higher than everybody else. For ceiling combination, everything is working in his favor. Moving on to the A tier, Alvin Kamara. Big game and a bad matchup last week. Very similar to Christian McCaffrey. Their play styles where he gets a ton of volume on the ground, but he's heavily targeted through the air. Now, the offense for the Saints is not nearly as good as the 49ers. So that's always going to keep touchdown equity a little bit lower because CMC is averaging 1 touchdown per game on the ground. Alvin Kamara less than half a touchdown per game. He's also less efficient at 3.8 yards per carry. But what keeps him elite is this 21% target share, nearly 7 catches and 8 targets per game, 45 receiving yards, 22.4 opportunities per game, which is actually slightly edging out CMC, but like I said, just not quite as efficient. But a great matchup versus the Carolina Panthers, who are allowing the 3rd most points per game position at 28.3, nearly 1.5 rushing touchdowns, and 110 rushing yards per game. We're not sure what the quarterback situation is going to be for the New Orleans Saints, but no matter who it is, Jameis Winston, Taysom Hill, Derek Carr, Kamara should be fine in an elite matchup. And then after these two, honestly, the running back position is a little bit murky this week. So the rankings feel a bit weird. I just want to give a heads up to everybody because I always get comments every single week saying I'm disrespecting certain players or maybe I'm being biased towards certain guys. 100% not the case. I just go off my model projection that I build for DFS every single week for DraftKings and FanDuel. Then I translate it to season-long format and simply just all I go off. So I have zero bias in anything I do. I'm strictly just a numbers guy. So don't think I'm disrespecting any of your favorite players. Let's move on. We have Austin Eckler coming up next. Dream matchup versus the Broncos. They're allowing the most points per game to the position. 30.4, 130 rushing yards, and nearly a rushing touchdown per game. Also giving it up through the air as well. 0.3 receiving touchdowns, 6 catches, and 40 receiving yards. Now, I always say this every single week. Their defense has gotten way better ever since that Miami game. But the Chargers are at home. 23-point implied team total. Austin Eckler, the talent has not been there this season, but he still gets plenty of opportunity. Close to 20 per game. Currently sitting at 18.78. Close to 5 targets, 14% target share, and 14 carries per game. But he's been at a very, very bad 3.5 yards per carry, which looking at the entire list here, that is the worst of any running back we're going to talk about until we hit Josh Jacobs. And after that, that is just the absolute worst. And he's definitely lost some burst. He's definitely lost some speed. He does not look great out there, but we should get some goal line carries if he can just fall into the end zone with 3 to 5 catches and 50, 70 total yards. It's not the worst day in the world. I just like the matchup quite a bit. Isaiah Pacheco is cracking the A tier this week. He's been pretty good for fantasy purposes. It's a decent matchup versus the Buffalo Bills, who are currently 21st versus the position. And the nice thing has been that Jerick McKinnon's been out the previous 2 weeks. We'll see what happens this weekend. But either way, we know Isaiah Pacheco is going to get the lion's share of the workload in this offense, which we always know the RB1 for Andy Reid. It's a very fantasy relevant role. In the previous 2 weeks, roughly right around 25 fantasy points. While we can't project 25 fantasy points every single week going forward, the upside is certainly there for it. It's a good matchup versus Buffalo. 25-point implied team total, 2.5-point spread in his favor. And he's averaging nearly 18 opportunities per game as well, with a decent chunk of that being in the passing game. So while he might not have the name value of some of these other guys, I do think he deserves to be up in this A tier. Now we're going right back to the Zach Mosswell, who did fail us versus the Titans. Just got over 7 fantasy points, depending on your league scoring. But the opportunity was there, and that's the only thing you can ask for or project when it comes to running backs. Because if you're going to get volume, decent chances are you're going to put up some fantasy points. And it's a pretty good spot versus the Bengals, who are currently 18th versus running backs, allowing nearly 100 rushing yards and close to 1 rushing touchdown per game. Like I said, the production wasn't there, but the volume was. Over 20 total opportunities in that one, with I believe having 3 targets, 19 carries, and plenty of work inside the 10. So the touchdown opportunities will certainly be there. 4.5 yards per carry on the season. If you're going to get as close to 20 touches, I'm sorry, but you pretty much have to be in the B or A tier. That's not always the case, but assuming your offense at least has a little bit of life. And we have seen, if you're the RB1 for the Colts this year, you're going to have fantasy upside. Moving on to our B tier, we have Devon Achane leading us off for the Miami Dolphins. And I know he had a pretty big game last week. A lot of that did come in garbage time, though. I think at one point I was just looking at the ticker on the app because I was watching other games. But I'm pretty sure like Devon Achane had almost seen 10 straight carries in a row. Got into the end zone, but either way, the game script could be once again very similar, as they are 13.5 point favorites versus Tennessee Titans. 30.25 implied team total, which is the highest of the week. The Titans' run defense isn't as good as it used to be. They're not bad. They're still ninth fewest points per game to the running back position, only 85 rushing yards and half a rushing touchdown. But I don't think it's going to be good enough to stop this Miami offense that's been firing on all cylinders all season long, especially when you have to respect the pass with Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle all day. It's really hard just to stack the box and try to stop Raheem Mostert in the bottom 10. So I like him quite a bit. I think he has a little bit more upside than Raheem Mostert, but both are going to be fantasy relevant. Kyren Williams of the Los Angeles Rams. Brutal matchup overall for the Rams here versus the Baltimore Ravens, although I do think there's going to be some weather in this game. It's too early in the week for me to care about that as of right now, but that's something to keep an eye on throughout the week. Pretty low implied team total at 16.5, 7.5 point dogs on the road, but he's going to be involved in the passing game as well, which I think is going to keep him fantasy relevant this week as a lower end RB1. But when he's been the starting running back for the Rams this year, he has been dominant for fantasy purposes, averaging 17 carries per game, just under 90 rushing yards, over 5 yards per carry, 4.25 targets, which equates to a 12% target share. And he's also been a touchdown scoring machine. So even though the matchup sucks, a little bit easier to run the Ravens than it is to pass. Up next is Bijan Robinson, who I got a lot of hate for last week for not having him super high against the New York Jets. And while the volume was still there, just wasn't an amazing fantasy output. But I still think he's a borderline RB1 in this game versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Bit of a worse matchup here, as the Buccaneers are allowing the 12th fewest points per game in the position at 84 rushing yards per game. But we've seen the volume be pretty solid the previous 3 weeks with involvement in the passing game. We know he's been efficient with the touches that he gets. So playing at home here is a 2.5 point favorite, 21 point implied team total. I'm still fine with Bijan being a borderline RB1 this week. Tony Pollard, tough matchup versus the Philadelphia Eagles. I've loved him the past month now, and he's finally been finding the end zone recently, which has been nice. But the Philadelphia Eagles are a team that you want to pass on and not run on. Allowing the fewest points per game in the position, 66 rushing yards per game and only a quarter of a rushing touchdown. But this is still one of the best offenses in the league, and this game does feature the highest point over-under of the entire weekend at 52.5. 28 point implied team total for the Dallas Cowboys, which is still extremely high. 3.5 point favorites at home as well in primetime on Sunday night. And Pollard's averaging close to 20 opportunities per game, right at 19.08. 2 targets per game and 15 carries. Hasn't been super efficient this season, but there will always be scoring opportunities when you're in the Dallas Cowboys offense. The problem is Dak Prescott's trying to get his MVP bid, and every single time they get around the goal line, it always seems like he's going to try to take it himself. Not through the ground necessarily, but trying to get the ball through the air into the end zone. But Pollard will still have his opportunities. Then we have Rachaad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and he's been one of the more consistent backs in recent weeks. Because if you were in a PPR league, those receptions add up a ton. He's not the best rusher on the ground, although we have seen his yards per carry rise the previous few weeks because they have been great matchups. This matchup versus Atlanta, I wouldn't say it's great. They're allowing the second fewest points per game in the position at only 80 rushing yards. They have yet to allow a rushing touchdown this season. But what we like Rachaad White about is he's averaging close to 4 catches per game, over 4 targets, 32 receiving yards, and he gets you whatever he gets on the ground. If he gets to the end zone, great. If not, he still has a nice floor because of that receiving upside. So Rachaad White here being in the B tier just because of his consistency. And then we have Saquon Barkley of the New York Giants, and this offense obviously sucks. We have Tommy DeVito running the show at 15.5 implied team total, and they come in as 6.5 point dogs at home. But he's going to get plenty of volume, should see 20 plus touches here, with a decent chunk of that being through the air, plus it's a plus matchup versus the Packers, who are currently 25th versus the running back position. Moving on to the C tier, we have Josh Jacobs, and he's only here because he's a volume guy. Obviously, the efficiency has been terrible this year at 3.5 yards per carry. This is not a good offense, only an 18.75 implied team total this week, 3 point dogs at home versus the Minnesota Vikings, who you typically want to pass on the Vikings and not run the ball. They're allowing the 9th fewest points per game to the position this year at only 71 rushing yards. So I don't love Jacobs this week. He still gets so much volume to where he's going to be fantasy relevant because if he just falls into the end zone a couple times, that's the upside that he has every single week, and the floor is going to be there. Honestly, Jacobs and Barkley are the same exact play. They get so much volume because of all these running backs we've talked about so far. No one's averaging more opportunities per game than Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs. It's just they haven't been that efficient this season, and their offenses are horrible. So it's basically just what's holding them back. And then we have Travis Etienne of the Jacksonville Jaguars. This is the lowest I have had him, but when you have a backup quarterback now under center with CJ Beathard, just the entire offense in general is going to be down a little bit. Plus, I don't really love the matchup versus the Browns, allowing the 12th fewest points in the position. The volume is certain there. He's averaging 21 touches per game, but last week it wasn't there so much. Was dealing with the chest issues. We saw Dearness Johnson on the field a little bit, and only a 13.75 implied team total on the road in Cleveland this week. Your total is that low. The touchdown equity is much lower, and you have the backup quarterback, so that's a little bit lower in the rankings this week, because typically he's in that A tier for me, but not so much this week. Raheem Mostert of the Miami Dolphins, he has that Devon Achane upside to be in that upper end B tier, even in the A tier. But I do think when both are healthy, Achane is the preferred option in this offense, so both have fantasy upside. Then we have Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. I'm pretty much going to pair them together because it's really hard to project which one you think will have the better game. And they usually end up not being too far apart from each other. Now, they're very different play styles. Jahmyr Gibbs, he's electric. Get him in open space and get him the ball in the passing game. David Montgomery, he's a bruiser. And get the ball around the goal line. You get your goal line touchdown, you'll be happy. David Montgomery's output. But this is not a good matchup for Chicago. I know they're currently ranked 20th versus running backs, but they're only allowing 60 rushing yards per game. They're mostly getting beat up through the air, which would be more so Jahmyr Gibbs kind of style. 60 receiving yards, 6 catches, nearly half a receiving touchdown per game, but those kind of numbers are really hard to project for running back on an average basis. So I'm fine with either of these guys as RB2s this week, but I don't think the ceiling is going to be there. Then we have Joe Mixon of the Cincinnati Bengals, and I kind of slandered him in the last video. I just didn't like the spot versus Jacksonville. They've had a really tough run defense this season, and we have a backup quarterback throwing the football for that team, so I just think scoring equity is going to be there. They had a super low implied team total. Well, Jake Browning turned into a better version of Joe Burrow, so offensive explosion for the Cincinnati Bengals, so that was obviously way off base. But I don't think that's going to be the same exact thing going forward. We're definitely going to have some regression, but this is a pretty good matchup versus Indianapolis Colts, who are on the 4th most points against the running back position, over 100 rushing yards and over 1 rushing touchdown. And Mixon's still going to get volume. They did get Chase Brown a little bit more involved last week, so that may be something to be concerned about a little bit, but we're going to get 15 plus touches out of Joe Mixon versus that Colts run defense. And Jake Browning looks competent. The upside will still be there for Mixon, even though he's a pretty inefficient back in general. And I feel like these C-tier running backs just never end. They're all just really boring volume plays. Javonte Williams, there's 3 backs in this offense, but he's definitely the preferred one. Good matchup versus the Chargers, who are currently 22nd versus running backs. Really all I have to say about Javonte, but if we're going to get close to 15 opportunities versus the Chargers, I think they're at least fantasy relevant in the C tier. Derrick Henry, he is him in December. In recent weeks, we've seen the touchdowns certainly been adding up for Derrick Henry, but this is about the worst possible game script you could ask for him. Plus, he got banged up in that last game, so I'm assuming he's going to be good to go, but you never know. If not, Spears would certainly be a pretty good option this weekend versus Miami because he's more involved in the passing game. But when the Titans are down and trailing, you can pretty much kiss Derrick Henry's upside goodbye. So I could definitely see this being more of a Spears week, but with his touchdown upside that we know he has every single week, he at least has to be in the C tier, but there's a 13.5 point dog versus Miami, which it's easier to pass on Miami than it is to run on them. They're allowing these 6 fewest points to gain the position. I'm just giving him respect here because we have the goal line plunge potential, but that's really about it. Leading off our D tier, we have Breece Hall, who's not a D tier talent, but the situation in New York is just absolutely awful. 13-point implied team total here at home versus the Houston Texans, 6.5 point dogs here. He's going to get dump offs, which is going to keep him fantasy relevant, but the quarterback situation, it's murky. They got rid of Boyle. They said last week they want to get Dalvin Cook more involved, which I'm not sure why you want to get that washing machine more carries in this offense, but whatever it may be. But it's not even a great matchup versus the Texans. In seasons past, you could always run on these guys, but they're only allowing 70 rushing yards per game this season, despite being 16th versus running backs. So there's hope for dump offs for Breece Hall, but that's really about the only upside you can get. And then we have James Cook and the Buffalo Bills, definitely the preferred option in this offense when it comes to the running game, although Latavius Murray can always be annoying with the goal line plunge. And we always have Josh Allen run the goal line as well. So you just better hope James Cook gets a couple of dump offs and is pretty efficient with his work on the ground yardage-wise, which he has been this season, averaging nearly 30 receiving yards per game and close to 5 yards per carry. Only a 9% target share, though, and only averaging 12 carries per game, which equates to just under 16 opportunities. And it's not an amazing matchup versus the Chiefs, but they are allowing 91 rushing yards per game to the position, so I'm not like in love with James Cook, but I do think he's somewhat startable. Then we have DeAndre Swift of the Philadelphia Eagles. Didn't really like him last week versus the 49ers, a pretty tough matchup, and once again, not the greatest spot here versus the Dallas Cowboys. They're allowing the 3rd fewest points to gain the position. Now, this is a great running team, but the problem is Jalen Hurts steals all the touchdown upside from DeAndre Swift. He's been efficient this year, 4.7 yards per carry, and he's involved in the passing game. But even though he is involved in the passing game, it's only equating to 3.5 targets per game on 11% target share and less than 20 receiving yards, which is actually even worse than James Cook. We don't really view James Cook as an elite receiving back. So tough spot here, and just whenever they get around the goal line, it's not going to be a handoff to DeAndre Swift. It's going to be the tush push, which is undefeated. Then we have Jerome Ford of the Cleveland Browns. Not sure what the quarterback situation is going to be for the Browns this week. I'm hoping it's Joe Flacco. I definitely think he's the best option here. And while Jacksonville's defense has not been great this year, they have been tougher versus running backs than they have been versus the past. 17th versus the position, but they're only allowing 65 rushing yards per game. Where they have struggled is through the air, 7 catches, 49 receiving yards, and Jerome Ford is the preferred receiving back in this offense, so I'm fine with him here to catch a nice, it was like 20-yard touchdown from Joe Flacco on the opening drive last week, so I think he is startable as a flex option in deeper leagues, or if you're just hurt at the running back position, he's fine. Jalen Warren of the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is probably the grossest game of all time, a 30.5 over-under, which I cannot fact-check this right off the top of my head, but this is the lowest total I have ever seen. It's a 5.5 point spread in the Steelers' favor. And Najee Harris did miss practice on Tuesday. I'm recording this on Wednesday morning, so I'm not sure what the Steelers' practice report is going to look like. But if Najee Harris happened to miss, you can probably bump up Jalen Warren a bit. He's been pretty efficient with his touches this year, just under 6 yards per carry. I'm not too concerned about this matchup versus the New England Patriots. Another guy they have to keep an eye out for the injury report is Kenneth Walker, because we know Zach Charbonnet left the game early on Thursday night. Kenneth Walker did not give it a go. It sounds like he might be able to play this week, and if Zach Charbonnet is out, he's just the main RB there. It's a really tough matchup versus the 49ers, though, only allowing 56 rushing yards per game, but I do think he would be startable if he is in and Charbonnet is out. They're both playing. Well, it's just a really ugly situation overall. Another guy that's going to be reliant on injury news is A.J. Dillon of the Green Bay Packers, and he will kick off our F tier. If Aaron Jones happens to be out, which he has not been practicing for several weeks now with the MCL sprain, A.J. Dillon's been the main guy here. We know Patrick Taylor will get some snaps, but Dillon will be the preferred option. In this matchup here versus New York Giants, I would say it's pretty decent. They're 24th versus running back, so I think Dillon would be startable. Just horribly inefficient, and I just think he sucks. But hey, touches are touches, so I won't discriminate. Easy matchup versus the Giants. Najee Harris of the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's like the more boring version of Jaylen Warren. If he happened to miss, obviously don't play him, and that'd be a major bump to Jaylen Warren. But if both are healthy, we know it's a pretty even split for the most part, but he will see some goal line carries. Chuba Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers. On the carries last week and actually had a pretty solid day versus Tampa Bay Buccaneers run defense. So if we're going to see volume like that going forward, he's going to be relevant. Alexander Madison of the Minnesota Vikings. Looks like we're getting a Justin Jefferson back this week, so that's just a big bump for the offense overall. Now, he does split with Ty Chandler. That's why he's not a little bit higher, but this is a good matchup versus the Raiders, who are currently 27 versus the position, allowing 105 rushing yards per game. And then we have Fat Zeke here. Ramondre Stevenson is going to be out, so he's going to be the main RB. And while I don't expect much out of him, this is a decent matchup on the ground versus Pittsburgh. 19 first running backs, allowing over 100 rushing yards per game. But I believe this is the lowest implied team total I've ever seen. I'm trying to think of the first week the Giants had with Tommy DeVito, what that implied team total was, but I'm not sure it was worse than 12.5. So yeah, not expecting much. Obviously not going to have much touchdown equity. And the Patriots are trotting out Bailey Zappi, Ezekiel Elliott, and like Devontae Parker. Mario Douglas happens to miss. That is just going to be downright disgusting. But with that being said, that's all I got for you this week. So I hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure you leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel for brand new. Wish you all the best of luck, and I'll have my wide receiver video out later today or tomorrow.